The day the children ran to him. The sun was warm over the dusty roads of Judea, the kind of warm that made the air shimmer and the palm leaves glow like gold. Families were moving through the marketplace, children running between the stalls with the kind of energy only innocence can carry. In the distance, people could already hear a familiar voice come, steady and filled with something deeper than authority, something like love. Jesus had arrived. His disciples were doing what they always did, trying to guide the crowd, making sure things didn't get out of control. But this time, something different was happening. Children, tiny feet, tiny hands, tiny hearts began slipping through the adults. They weren't afraid. They didn't hesitate. They didn't think about rules or status or how they looked. They simply saw him and ran. Mothers followed behind, unsure if they were doing the right thing. Fathers watched from a distance, nervous about bringing their little ones so close to her. Teachers surrounded by adults seeking miracles and answers. And the disciples? They weren't thrilled. "Keep them back," one of them said, holding out an arm. "He's teaching. He's busy. Don't let the children disturb him." But the children didn't stop. One little girl with tangled curls and a giggle that sounded like bells reached the front first. She looked up at Jesus with big eyes that held no fear, only trust. Jesus knelt, bringing himself to her height. She grabbed his hand like she'd known him all her life. The disciples tried again. "Teacher, should we send them away? They're too young to understand." Jesus lifted his head slowly, his expression changing, not angry, but disappointed in a way that pressed silently on the heart. "Let the little children come to me," he said, his voice steady and warm. "Do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." The crowd froze. The parents looked at one another. The disciples stepped back, ashamed. And then something beautiful happened. Jesus sat on a nearby stone, and the children gathered around him, some in his lap, some leaning against his robe, others sitting in the dust at his feet. He placed his hands gently on their heads, blessing them one by one, as if each child were the only one in the world. In that moment, the people realized something profound. To Jesus, a child's simple heart was not a distraction. It was the doorway to the kingdom. Heaven in their eyes, the children sat in a small circle around Jesus, dust settling on their tunics, eyes glowing with a purity that only untouched hearts carry. They weren't asking for miracles. They weren't interested in deep theological debates. They simply wanted to be near him because something in his presence felt like home. One little boy, no older than 5, tugged at Jesus' sleeve. "Teacher," he whispered, "why do you smile at us so much?" Jesus turned to him with a gentle look that softened the entire crowd. "Because," he said, "your hearts see more clearly than many who have lived long. You trust easily, you forgive quickly, and you love without conditions. That is what heaven looks like." The disciples listened quietly, still embarrassed about moments earlier. Their understanding of greatness had always been shaped by the world's status, strength, knowledge, age. A child didn't fit into that definition. But watching Jesus now, they began to sense they had missed something big. A mother stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she held her toddler close. "Rabbi," she said softly, Are you saying our children are closer to God than we are? Jesus didn't hesitate. In many ways, yes, he replied. Unless you become like these little ones, humble, open, trusting, you will struggle to enter the kingdom of heaven. Children do not come with pride. They do not pretend. They simply come. The woman clutched her child, tears forming in her eyes, tears not of sadness, but realization. Around her, other parents felt the same. They had spent years trying to teach their children how to grow up. But Jesus was teaching the adults how to return to a childlike heart. One of the children, a boy missing one sandal, boldly climbed onto Jesus' lap. The crowd gasped at the boldness, but Jesus laughed softly and steadied the boy. "See," he said, brushing dust from the child's foot. "He comes without fear because he knows he is loved." A murmur swept through the people. Even the disciples felt their hearts shift. For the first time, they understood that Jesus had not come only for the wise, the powerful, or the grown. He had come for the innocent, the overlooked, the ones whose purity reflected heaven more clearly than any learned speech ever could. As the scene unfolded, something unseen stirred in the air, not a miracle of sight or sound, but a miracle of understanding. The kingdom of heaven was closer than they had ever realized. The lesson adults never learned. As the afternoon sun drifted lower, shadows stretched across the open field where Jesus sat surrounded by children. The joyful noise of their laughter mixed with the quiet hum of the crowd. But there was something deeper happening beneath the surface, something the adults were only beginning to understand. One of the disciples, John, stepped closer. He had always been gentler than the others, but even he looked puzzled. "Master," he asked, "we have studied the scriptures since childhood. We know the laws, the teachings, the traditions. Yet you say the kingdom belongs to these small ones. What have we missed?" Jesus looked at him with a kindness that held truth like a flame. "John, you have learned much," he said, "but sometimes knowledge builds walls instead of bridges. Children do not carry such walls. They come open, not guarded. Their hearts are free to receive." The people around him nodded slowly, trying to absorb the words. A father strong, quiet, the kind of man who rarely showed emotion, took a bold step forward. His son clung to his leg, half hiding behind him. "I have always taught my boy to be strong," the father admitted, "to stand tall, to not cry. But now I see. Maybe I have been teaching him the wrong kind of strength." Jesus reached out, placing a hand gently on the man's shoulder. "Real strength," he said, "is not hardness. It is the courage to remain tender in a world that tries to harden you." Children understand this without being taught. They forgive quickly. They let go of offenses. They trust even after being hurt. A hush washed over the crowd, deep, reflective, almost heavy. Nearby, a little girl with bright eyes tugged at her mother's robe. "Mama," she whispered, "does Jesus want us just as we are?" Jesus heard her before her mother could respond. "Yes," he said softly, "I want you exactly as you are. And I want the grown-ups to remember who they once were." The words hit the adults like a gentle but undeniable wind. Memories stirred of childhood days when they too had laughed freely, trusted openly, believed without hesitation. Somewhere along the way, life had taken that simplicity and replaced it with fear, pride, and doubt. Jesus looked at the group of children around him, smiling, giggling, leaning against his side, and then at the adults standing just beyond them. "The kingdom of heaven," he said, "is found when you return to the heart you had before the world taught you to hide it." The people didn't move. They simply listened because, for the first time, they felt the truth reach them. The day innocence became the teacher, evening's golden light began to settle across the hills, painting everything with a soft glow. The children were still gathered around Jesus, some seated close, others playing with sticks and pebbles at his feet. But now, instead of teaching them, Jesus allowed them to become the teachers. A tiny girl with dimples held up a small wildflower she had picked from nearby. "Look," she said proudly, "it's the prettiest one I found." Jesus smiled as she placed the flower in his hand. "Why did you choose this one?" he asked gently. "Because..." She paused, thinking with the seriousness only a child could carry. It looked lonely. Her answer rippled through the onlookers like a quiet revelation. The disciples exchanged glances. None of them had ever chosen something simply because it seemed lonely. Children noticed what adults pretended not to see. Jesus lifted the flower slightly. "This is the heart of the kingdom," he said softly. "A heart that sees the forgotten and chooses to care." A young boy, dusty-faced, stepped forward next. He held a small wooden toy carved by his father. Without hesitation, he offered it to Jesus. "You can have it," he said. "I don't mind sharing." The crowd stared. This child had offered the only toy he owned, with no thought of reward. Jesus accepted it with deep gratitude. "You see," he said, turning to the adults, "to enter the kingdom, you must learn to give without fear. Children do not give because they want something back. They give because love makes sharing natural." A mother wiped her eyes. A merchant lowered his head. Even the disciples felt a quiet sting in their hearts because they realized children were living the teachings adults struggled to understand. Not far off, two little boys began arguing over a small stone they both wanted. Their voices rose tiny but intense. Before anyone could intervene, one boy suddenly sighed, dropped the stone, and said, "Fine, you can have it. I don't want to fight." Instant forgiveness, zero ego. Argument over in seconds. Jesus chuckled softly. "This," he said, lifting his hand toward the boys, "is how peace survives. Adults argue to win. Children stop to keep friendship." The people fell silent again, humbled, moved, awakened. On that quiet hillside, the children had become mirrors, reflecting what heaven truly valued: compassion, generosity, humility, and hearts unafraid to love. And the adults, for the first time, were ready to learn. A question that silenced the crowd. As twilight deepened, a cool breeze drifted across the hillside. Families wrapped their cloaks a little tighter while the children remained close to Jesus, as if his presence alone kept them warm. The disciples watched carefully, sensing this moment was building toward something deeper, something that would challenge every adult standing there. A young boy, maybe 7, lifted his hand shyly. "Teacher, can I ask you something?" Jesus turned to him with gentle attention. "Of course. What troubles your heart?" The boy hesitated, glancing at his parents, before speaking. Why do grown-ups forget to be happy? We smile all the time, but they look tired. The question fell over the crowd like a soft but undeniable strike. No one expected it. No one was prepared to answer. Adults exchanged uncomfortable looks, as if a child had exposed something they'd all tried to hide. Jesus looked at the boy, then at the adults. His eyes filled with compassion that cut deeper than any rebuke. "Children," he said slowly, "find joy easily because their hearts are free. But as people grow older, they begin to carry things they were never meant to carry: fear, pride, worry, the need to prove themselves. These things steal their joy." A mother covered her mouth as tears threatened to spill. A father stared at the ground. Even the disciples shifted uneasily. The child's simple question had touched a wound adults rarely acknowledged. Jesus continued, "Heaven's joy is not lost. It is buried, and the ones who can show you where it is hidden are these little ones." A girl with braided hair tugged at her father's sleeve. "Papa," she whispered, "you used to laugh with me all the time. What happened?" Her father's eyes softened. Something inside him cracked open. He knelt down, pulled her close, and whispered, "I think I forgot how, but I want to remember." Jesus nodded approvingly. "You see," he said, "the kingdom of heaven is not far. It is not complicated. It is found whenever your heart becomes light, again free of the weight the world forces upon you." A deep silence settled, not heavy, but healing. Parents held their children a little tighter. Adults looked inward, realizing how far they drifted from the innocence they once had. And in that silence, Jesus added softly, "To follow me, you must learn to lay down what steals your joy and pick up what children carry naturally: trust, wonder, and peace." The crowd absorbed his words, knowing something inside them had begun to change. The hands that changed everything. The sun had almost disappeared behind the hills, leaving the sky painted in soft purples and golds. The children, still gathered around Jesus, had grown quieter. The day of excitement was fading into a gentle calm. But Jesus wasn't finished, not yet. Something in his expression said this moment carried a meaning no one would forget. One little boy rested his head against Jesus' arm, exhausted from playing. Another girl leaned on his knee, tracing circles in the dust with her finger. Parents watched, amazed at how natural it seemed how these tiny hands treated Jesus, not as a distant teacher, but as someone safe, someone familiar. Jesus placed his hands on each child's head, one by one. Not rushed, not casual. He blessed them with a care so personal it felt like time had stopped. His touch carried warmth deeper than the cooling evening air, something like reassurance, like protection. The disciples stood back, watching. Peter whispered to Andrew, "He blesses them as if they're royalty." Andrew nodded. "Maybe they are." A mother came forward hesitantly, her daughter beside her. The little girl had a limp, one foot dragging slightly behind the other. She looked nervous, unsure if she should step closer. Jesus extended his hand, inviting her with a smile that dissolved every fear. She moved toward him, slow and unsure. Jesus rested his palm against her cheek, and something invisible yet undeniable spread through the air. Sense of peace so thick the crowd felt it in their chests. Little one, he whispered, your weakness does not make you less in my Father's eyes. You are seen. You are cherished. Her mother wept silently, holding her hands against her mouth. The girl wrapped her tiny fingers around Jesus' wrist, and for a moment, her limbs seemed to lighten, not healed fully, but lighter, as if her burden had been touched by heaven itself. Nearby, two siblings approached, arguing under their breath about who should go first. Jesus laughed softly. Come together, he said. Heaven has room for both of you. They came, holding hands, forgetting their argument instantly. Jesus looked at the crowd, his voice gentle but strong. These hands, small as they are, will shape the world more than you think. The kingdom grows wherever innocence is honored, wherever purity is protected, wherever love remains simple. The adults listened, humbled again. On that hillside, Jesus lifted children not only into his arms, but into a place of spiritual greatness the world had never considered. And the world would never see children the same way again. The evening when heaven felt near, night drew closer, and tiny stars began peeking through the fading light. Families prepared to leave, but no one truly wanted to go. Something sacred had settled over the hillside, something so gentle and pure that even the breeze felt reverent. The children clung to Jesus as if letting go meant losing the safest place they had ever known. One little boy climbed onto a nearby rock, staring at the sky. Jesus, he asked softly, is heaven really far away? Jesus looked up at him with a calm smile. Not as far as people think. The boy tilted his head, waiting. Heaven, Jesus continued, is close whenever love is simple, whenever forgiveness comes quickly, whenever hearts stay pure. Children carry pieces of heaven with them. The boy nodded as if he understood perfectly, and maybe, in his innocence, he did. A group of mothers gathered nearby, whispering among themselves. One of them, with tired eyes and a worried expression, finally stepped forward. Teacher, she asked, how do we keep our children close to God when the world is so full of darkness? Jesus looked at her with compassion. By letting them keep their light, he said. Do not rush them to grow hard. Do not teach them fear before they learn trust. Protect their innocence not by hiding them from the world, but by showing them love stronger than the world's shadows. Another father stepped in. But we fail, he said quietly. We get angry. We get distracted. We forget. Jesus placed a hand over the man's heart. Then return, he said. Return again and again to the kindness you want them to learn. Children do not need perfect parents, only present ones. Nearby, a tiny girl climbed into Jesus' lap without hesitation. She held a small pebble shaped like a heart and placed it in his hand. It's for you, she said, so you don't forget us when you go. Jesus' eyes softened. Little one, he whispered, I could never forget you. The Father holds every child in his care. You are written on heaven's heart. The adults felt a quiet shiver move through them, hope, comfort, conviction all woven together. The breeze grew cooler, the stars brighter, but no one moved. They were witnessing something beyond teaching, beyond blessing. They were witnessing heaven reflected in small faces, tiny hands, and hearts untouched by the world's weight. And for the first time, many of them realized they didn't just need to protect their children, they needed to learn from them. When the children spoke truth without knowing, the night sky had deepened into a velvet blue, sprinkled with stars that shimmered like tiny lanterns. Most of the children were now sitting quietly around Jesus, their earlier energy replaced by a peaceful stillness. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty at all, more like the world was listening. A small boy, rubbing his sleepy eyes, whispered, "Jesus, why do you love us so much?" The question drifted through the air with a softness that felt almost holy. Jesus looked at him, brushing hair from the boy's forehead. "Because you remind the world how God intended hearts to be pure, gentle, full of trust. When I look at you, I see what heaven celebrates." The crowd absorbed his words, each adult struck by how effortless a child's faith truly was. Then unexpectedly, a little girl stood up. Her voice was tiny, but her words carried weight. "My mama cries at night," she said, pointing toward a woman in the crowd. "I think she's scared. Can you help her not be scared anymore?" The mother covered her face, trembling with emotion. She hadn't realized her daughter noticed children always notice what adults hide. Jesus rose slowly, kneeling beside the woman. "Fear stays loud when love grows quiet," he said gently. "But your daughter hears your heart, even when you try to hide it. Let her remind you that faith isn't heavy unless you carry it alone." The woman wept openly, pulling her daughter close. Across the field, another child spoke, this one bolder. "My father shouts," he said plainly, "but he loves me. He just forgets sometimes." The father stood frozen, guilt washing over him like a wave he couldn't outrun. Jesus turned toward him, not with judgment, but with understanding. "Children forgive before adults even realize they've hurt them," he said. "Their love is quick, because they don't count wounds the way grown-ups do." The father knelt and embraced his son tightly, whispering apologies into his hair. Nearby, two friends argued earlier over a stick were now laughing again, leaning against each other as if nothing had happened. Jesus glanced at them and said to the crowd, "See, their hearts heal fast. That is why heaven draws near to them." One more child spoke up, a girl barely 4, holding a small cloth doll. "Jesus," she said, "when you talk, my heart doesn't feel scared anymore." Jesus smiled, lifting her gently into his arms. "That's because truth brings peace, and peace brings you closer to God." Adults watched in awe as child after child spoke with honesty untouched by fear. Their tiny voices carried truths grown-ups had hidden, ignored, or forgotten long ago. And for the first time, the people realized the innocence of children wasn't a weakness. It was divine clarity. The night the world felt small and God felt close. Darkness had fully settled, but no one felt afraid. The hillside where Jesus sat with the children seemed to glow with a peace that didn't come from lamps or torches. It came from the presence of something holy, something bigger than the night. Families stayed close, unwilling to break the moment that had changed them so deeply. A gentle silence wrapped around the group until one little boy broke it with a thought so innocent it startled everyone. "Jesus," he said, "when you're here, it feels like the whole world is small, like everything bad gets quiet." Jesus looked at him with a soft smile. "That's because love makes big things small," he said. Fear shrinks, worry fades, pain steps back. A pure heart sees God even in the dark. The boy nodded sleepily, resting against his mother. A few steps away, a girl holding her brother's hand asked, "Is God listening right now?" Jesus knelt so his eyes were level with hers. "He never stops," he answered. "Children whisper, and heaven hears. Even when you don't speak, God listens to your heart." Her brother squeezed her hand tighter, comforted by the idea that their small voices mattered to the Creator himself. The disciples watched all this silently. They had walked with Jesus for months, seen storms calmed, miracles unfold, crowds transformed. But tonight felt different. Tonight, they weren't witnessing power. They were witnessing God's tenderness reflected in tiny hearts. Peter leaned toward Matthew and said under his breath, "We spend our lives trying to understand the kingdom, and these children walk into it without trying." Matthew nodded. They trust without needing explanations. Nearby, a timid child approached Jesus with a trembling lip. "Jesus, I'm scared of the dark," he whispered. Jesus lifted him into his arms instantly. "That's all right," he said softly. "Courage isn't about never feeling afraid. It's choosing love even when fear is near. When you trust me, you shine like a lamp in the night." The child buried his face in Jesus' shoulder, comforted as if wrapped in light itself. Parents exchanged glances, soft, humbled, changed. For the first time, many of them understood that their children weren't fragile souls needing constant fixing. They were guiding lights, pulling them back toward faith, softness, and truth. Jesus looked at the entire group, children huddled close, adults standing behind them, disciples listening with new eyes, and said quietly, "When hearts stay gentle, heaven draws near." And tonight, it is very near. The air felt warmer, the night felt safer, and every person there knew this was a moment God himself had carved into time. The night innocence became a path to heaven. The stars were bright now, scattered across the sky like promises waiting to be fulfilled. Families slowly prepared to leave, though every step felt reluctant. The children clung to Jesus' arms around his neck, tiny fingers gripping his robe. Small faces pressed close as if they never wanted the moment to end. Jesus held each child gently, blessing them with the same tenderness he had shown all evening. When the last child stepped back into his mother's arms, Jesus rose and faced the entire crowd, adults, disciples, families who had been transformed without even realizing it. "This day," he said softly, "heaven has spoken through little hearts." The people listened, silent and still. "Children," Jesus continued, "show you the way not because they know everything, but because they trust the one who does. Their hearts are free from the weight you carry. They forgive quickly. They love fully. They believe easily. And this is the doorway into my Father's kingdom." The disciples exchanged off-filled glances. They had witnessed miracles of power before, but tonight they had witnessed a miracle of perspective, a glimpse into heaven through innocence. A father stepped forward, holding his son close. "Teacher," he said quietly, "what should we do to carry this with us?" Jesus smiled gently. "Protect their innocence. Cherish their wonder. Let their faith heal your doubts. And become again what you once were: humble, trusting, open-hearted." A mother wiped tears from her cheeks, lifting her daughter into her arms. "How do we keep our hearts like theirs?" she asked. "By choosing love when anger rises," Jesus replied. "By forgiving when pride resists. By trusting when fear shouts. Every time you return to innocence, you come closer to God." The words settled into their hearts, like seeds ready to grow. Jesus then turned to the children one last time. "Little ones," he said, "never let the world steal your light. Your laughter carries heaven. Your kindness reveals God. Wherever you go, you carry my Father's joy." The children beamed, their small faces glowing in the starlight. Families began to walk home, holding their children tighter, walking slower, as if they feared breaking the sacred silence of the moment. The disciples remained behind for a moment longer, watching Jesus with newfound clarity. Peter whispered, "We thought greatness looked like strength." John finished softly, "But tonight we learned greatness looks like innocence." As they followed Jesus down the quiet path, the night felt warmer, the world felt gentler, and heaven felt closer than it ever had before. And so, the story ended the way it began, with Jesus and the hearts of children, shining light into a world that desperately needed it.